Good morning, and I appreciate the invitation to be here today. So this is the first time I've met with this group, and the turnout is wonderful. So that means you all are interested in enrollment, which is great. So as Jan mentioned, my name is Chris Cheatham. I serve as the Senior Vice Provost for Academic Affairs, and for about 3 years or so, I was interim enrollment manager when our enrollment manager left to a new job, and it was going to be about 6 months, and then COVID hit. And so about 2.5 years after that, I kept serving as it, and thank goodness we hired someone. Unfortunately, that person also just left this about a week or so ago. Enrollment manager is like the football head coach job. If you don't do well, you go. And if you do well, you go. And so he went for good reasons. We wish Charles the best of luck. Charles Cotton took a job at Wayne State. And so the best news of the day is I am not going to serve as interim enrollment manager. We have someone else doing that. So Dr. Sarah Nelson, who's relatively new to the university, is taking over that role. So really, I just wanted to briefly give you an overview today of where we stand for the fall and how things are looking for the fall, because we know, and Jeff might talk about this and he'll correct my numbers, but you know that about 25% or so of our budget comes from the state and about 75% or so comes from tuition revenue. So enrollment is the biggest and largest driver of our budget. So that's one reason we get somewhat obsessed by it and almost track it like a stock ticker, and we really do. And so there's two things I really want to talk about. One is the enrollment forecast and the process behind that. And then secondly, like I mentioned, how are we looking for fall? Because that's really what we're tracking. So to start out with the enrollment forecast. So there is a committee on campus that is composed of members from different areas. Colleen and I actually co-chair this group, and it includes individuals from institutional research, specifically Jason Jack, who's our director of institutional research, and Will Stutz, who is our research scientist and also the associate director. Also includes individuals from student affairs, Higgy, the graduate college, registrar's office, financial aid, and others from enrollment management. And this group starts to meet in usually November or December of previous to the fall semester. And we start looking at indicators for how do we think fall enrollment is going to look. And that's why we have all those individuals in the room. So we always say that there's an art and a science to this. The science part is we look at the data to show where we are in comparison to previous years or what things are looking like. But the art of it is really learning what people are hearing from their areas. For a couple years ago, when there was really an issue with potential students getting visas, international students, we incorporate that to know we might have some difficulty getting students enrolled or accepted in here in time. And so we get the feel kind of from every individual, and then that incorporates into an enrollment forecast. And that enrollment forecast essentially forecasts or predicts what the next year's enrollment will be, and breaks it down looking at undergraduates, graduates, international students, all the different ways that you can look at it. And then that group meets every month, and Will Stutz is really, I have to call him out especially, he's the research scientist associate director. He does all of this magic behind the scenes to do all these predictions and algorithms, and we look at state and Midwest data as well. So we'll look at, the number of high school graduates in Michigan that are upcoming, even in the Midwest where we pull states from. So it's very much what's happening here, but also what's happening in where we typically get students from. And we also look at retention rates and all of those things that factor into bringing new students in and keeping our existing students. So we meet monthly, and that gets updated because as more time goes on, the better the data gets because we're getting closer to the fall semester. And we do that through June, and then in June we really do the final. So we'll be doing that in a few weeks here, the final forecast of what we actually believe fall and the subsequent semesters, spring and summer, will look like. And then that gets turned over to Colleen, and she does her magic of converting all of those things like the estimation of student credit hours and head counts into a dollar amount, essentially. And that's where the tuition part of the budget gets built on. So to give you a little bit of an update, so our enrollment forecast right now, and we're getting close to the end here, estimates that our head count will be just down about 1.4% compared to last year, which is one of the smallest declines we've had in a while. And again, this is not surprising because we did have some small classes that are kind of getting through the system, because when you have a small class, and we had a couple of those during COVID, those move through, and until those actually graduate and exit and get filled with larger classes, you're going to see those numbers not always return to positive. And so this year's challenge, because there's always a challenge, because we talk about student behavior is very predictable, believe it or not. I mean, students do things in the same pattern, but then something happens. And so COVID happened. And COVID blew all the predictions out of the water. No, there wasn't an enrollment manager who knew what was going to happen. And so we got through that, and we said, okay, we finally have some stability here that will go back to predictability. And then does anybody know what happened this year that affects enrollment? FAFSA. So the federal government, in its wonderful wisdom, did a good job of actually really simplifying the FAFSA form. How many of you had to fill that out for a kid this year? Yeah, I'll raise my hand too. It was a little glitchy. For a couple of my kids, I had to do it about 2 or 3 times, but the questions were much easier. But the glitchiness led to the fact that there was a long delay in getting to the point to allow families to fill out the FAFSA, and then there were also subsequent delays on getting that data to universities. And so we need that data to actually package our need-based financial aid. So there's 2 sources of money for students. Well, there's multiple sources, but from the university, we kind of use 2 pots. We call merit-based awards and need-based awards. So the merit-based awards, a student finds out about that really soon when they apply, because we let most students, when most students apply to the university or undergrad, like new freshmen, they find out within 48 hours whether they get in or not. We have it turned around that fast. And soon after that, we let them know about their merit-based awards, which for us is based on grade point average in high school. A couple years ago, became a test-optional university, so students do not have to submit SAT scores. If they do submit them, we don't actually look at them for the purposes of merit-based awards. They might be looked at for other scholarships that exist at the university that might have that requirement, but we don't, as an institution, even look at SAT scores anymore. And so that's one of the things we've adopted to try to really be an access-oriented institution. So the merit-based awards weren't affected, but the need-based awards were. And so those really just got out into the wild, really in the month of May. And so that is a lot later than is typical. And so that's really changed student and family behavior of deciding where they're going to go and deciding if they're going to go. So all of those things have really thrown the predictions in a little bit of a mess. I think we're through that now, but it certainly is later. The good and the bad is that what we are experiencing is what every other public university is experiencing as well. And some privates, but privates are a whole different thing. And so, Michigan State, Central, Grand Valley, they're all experiencing the same thing that we are. And in fact, what we tried to do is we tried to get our need-based aid out to students about a week or 2 earlier than those other universities, and we were successful at that. But universities tend to wait students tend to wait until they hear from everybody before they actually decide. And so that's factoring into this enrollment forecast a little bit. And so it could be a little bit pessimistic, but we still make adjustments up to the last second based on kind of, I hate to say what we're feeling and hearing, but there is some truth to that. So that's the enrollment forecast part, and it's an interesting process, and the data and the algorithms that institutional research has developed to do this are really good, and they, barring anything happening out in the wild, they are very accurate at estimating or forecasting where we're going to be. So that takes us to where we stand today. And when I talk about where we stand today, I talk about what do we think fall is going to look like when we compare it to this day last year. So we call these point-to-point comparisons. And so we are right now a certain number of days from census, which is the second week of fall semester. So last year, we look at this same day of how were we for fall 23 to look at how is fall 24 looking for fall 23. And so I want to share some of that data with you. It'll be a lot of numbers, but they're kind of the big picture numbers. So I want to start with applications, because you can't have a student if they don't apply. And if you look at our... Yeah, so that used to be up, but now it's not. So I get enthusiastic about this stuff. So I'll start with applications. So for fall 2024, so this upcoming fall semester, we saw our undergraduate applications increase by 8%, 8.0%. This is after about 5 or so continued years of application increases. We've seen application increase almost, or actually a little bit more than 40% over the last 4 or 5 years. So why have we seen that? Well, a couple reasons. The most is we adopted a new strategy of we started to reach out to high school students much earlier than we ever had. If you go back 6, 7 years ago, we typically reached out mostly to juniors and seniors in high school. We start freshmen right now. So we start sending items to freshman high school students, and we continually send them stuff until they reach their senior year and make a selection. So the idea is getting them more familiar with us, getting them more familiar with our name, and we get some outside help in doing this, but it really educates the student about what Western is like, and we do that much earlier. And that has really driven a lot of our increases in applications. So another good year of applications, and our graduate applications play an important part, but not as large. And we're seeing that our master's applications are down a little bit, but there is a reason for that. And part of it is that we have graduate programs that are using external application processes. You might have heard of centralized application systems, where if you were going into applying for a doctoral program in physical therapy, you apply through one system, and then that system sends out your applications. And so the way they're counted in our system is a little bit different. But generally speaking, with the undergrad, applications are looking really good. So if we look at what headcount looks like, and again, I say these numbers with caution because these numbers change every day now. So when we look at how we are for fall 24 compared to this time last year, they're doing this right now. Anybody know can guess why they're doing this right now? What's that? Might have heard the answer. Orientation. So we are in orientation season now. So groups of high school graduates come here and they register in bulk. And so if these days don't line up exactly as they did last year, you'll see these huge swings. And so we can go from minus to plus in a couple days, and we kind of recognize that. But this is what it is as of today. So for head count, we're looking at about down 6.8% compared to last year. And again, that's being influenced heavily by an orientation, a shift in some orientation dates. And we also have to do orientation a little bit different this year just because of with the Student Center and what amount of students we can accommodate. Graduate headcount is up 7.5%. We're seeing large growth in graduate programs. And that's one of the reasons that are really contributing to that growth in graduate enrollment is a program that the state is sponsoring called the Grow Your Own program. I'm not sure if you've heard about that, but it's a state program that targets individuals who work in public school districts, but who aren't teachers. But individuals who work at schools who may want to become teachers. And because of the teacher shortage, the state is funding and helping to pay for those individuals to get their degree and their teaching license. And Western, our College of Education and Human Development has been really aggressive in seeking out and making partnerships with a lot of the K through 12 public school districts, because that's how this works. You'll get into an agreement with Kalamazoo Public Schools to have their individuals come here. So we have a lot of agreements with students with school districts across the state, especially in Southwest Michigan. I think a bragging point the provost likes to say is that Ann Arbor partnered with us and not University of that blue and gold place down there. And so that's really contributed to growth. So overall, looking right now compared to this time last year, down about 4.4%. But again, we're pretty confident that will actually approach the forecast levels as we get through this orientation season and more first-year students enroll. So the last kind of metric I want to talk about, which is one you've heard the president talk about a ton, is student success, and specifically retention. And so as it gets harder and more competitive to get students here at Western, because we are competing with all other 15 publics and a lot of universities in the Midwest and the nation, and high school graduates are declining. So the pool of high school graduates is smaller. So it's harder to get students, and we have to work harder to get those students. So one of the key is when you get them, keep them. Have them be successful to retain. Not for too long, but to graduate in hopefully, the metrics always is a 6-year graduation rate. We also would like to push more of that towards a 4-year graduation rate because the longer it takes a student, the more income they are losing by not being out in the workforce if that's their choice, and their career's delayed. But the national benchmark is a 6 year. But to get them to graduation, we have to keep them. And we've seen tremendous improvements in retention over the past year or so. And a lot of that has been, you can attribute to the impact of the Empowering Futures gift, which has allowed us to really utilize some advanced technological resources to help students, but human resources to help students as well. So you might have heard like something, the Student Success Platform, and we call it the Student Success Hub. This is really like a one-stop shop for people who work at Western to really see what the student is experiencing. And so I think of it like if you ever called your cable company and the first person can't help you, you get bumped to the second person. Invariably, you have to start your story all over again. It's like Groundhog Day. They don't know anything about what you've done. This is what this tries to avoid. So as an advisor works with a student, they can put in notes to the system, and then if the student has a financial aid question, the financial aid individual can log in and see all the things that have happened and the interactions with that student. So it really provides a comprehensive hub of data for individual at Western to really serve students. It also provides alerts. So if a student's grades are midterm grades are dropping, it can send an alert to that student to say, hey, you might want to seek out help. The hope is in time, the system will, this gets a little bit scary, but will help identify students who are going to be in some, trouble's not the right word, but some negative things that could impact their success before the student even knows. So if you've ever seen the movie Minority Report, which is a really horrible context because it figured out that who was a criminal before they were a criminal. That's not what we're doing with students, but the idea is, are there factors that we can see that we can react to before they actually have an effect on the student? And so that's where we'll get to. And then the Empowering Futures Gifts have funded what we call navigators across campus. And these are individuals whose primary role is to really work with students and to help students find the resources on campus to have them be successful. So all these things with the hard work of all these individuals and advisors and all the divisions across campus, because a student's experience is impacted by every area on campus. There is not an individual on campus that doesn't impact the student experience. So for fall, we are continuing to see improvements. And so in all of our classes, and these numbers might look small, but these aren't percent changes. These are improvements, a percentage point improvement. We're seeing freshman retention go up another just under 1% right now. 1% is a big change in the world of retention. Sophomores who are now they've experienced a year of these efforts, we're seeing a 2.7 percentage point increase in their retention so far. Juniors, 2.1 percentage points, and seniors, 3.2 percentage points. And again, in the world of retention, those are really, really significant improvements. They might seem like small numbers, but they're not. And so that's another aspect that's really contributing to some of the positive changes we're seeing in enrollment. Even though some of the numbers are a little bit down, except we expect those to improve, but it's in line with the forecast. So I didn't time myself, but that's what I had. So I'm happy to answer any questions you might have now, or I'll stick around towards the end too. Yes?
What percentage do you think of the Kalamazoo promise is Western retained?
Oh, good question. You know what? I'm going to tell you if you give me 2 seconds. I'll also put a promotion into our institutional research website that is wonderful to explore, but so our retention, and when we talk about retention, a lot of times the number that you'll hear is FDIAC retention rate and FDIAC students, FTIAC. And what that stands for is first time in any college. So these are your stereotypical high school graduates who have not been at another university, who when they come to Western, this is their first college experience. And so we talk about if they started in fall 23, what percentage of those students are returning for fall 24. So again, this is a number that will change up to census. But your question about Kalamazoo Promise. So right now, our Kalamazoo Promise students have approximately 77.6% retention rate, which is just slightly right there about the university average, but a small bit lower, but a pretty good retention rate. Any other questions? Sure.
Expound a little further on this, for lack of a better description, the problem predicting system involved with students.
So the Student Success Hub.
Yes.
Yeah, so like the Student Success Hub, and it works on the Salesforce platform, if any of you are familiar with that mega billion-dollar company Salesforce. But essentially it's a database. And it's a database that we feed information into, and it communicates back and forth with Banner. And it's a system where data will move like grades, and so like midterm grades is an example. Midterm grades, faculty are not actually required to submit midterm grades. We wish they were, but they're not. But we really encourage them to, because that's a tool that allows us to see how is a student doing before those final grades. So a lot of that data goes into this system, and so that facilitates the human side of it working with those students. The other part of this is as this process becomes more advanced, there is an artificial intelligence component that can work with this system, which can start to look at patterns and grades and registration and all of those things, but it's only as good as the data you put in it that can start to predict things and essentially can provide alerts where it could tell an advisor, hey, you should really reach out to this student to figure that out. We're not quite there yet, but that's the hope in probably under 5 years that it gets to be a robust system that actually identifies students who are having challenges before those students might know they're having challenges.
I have one other question.
Sure.
So is that strictly based on Western's data, or is it checked against other universities?
That's a good question. Just Western's data. Yeah. Now, when we do some forecasting, or one of the things we do look at, kind of related to that, is once fall semester is underway, one of the things we do look at is for all the students who didn't pick Western, who made that mistake and went somewhere else. But I have 2 of those so far who have done that, but I got one coming in this fall. I hope you never hear his name, but my guess is you might. But we do look at all those students who didn't choose us to really look at where they went, because there is this database called the National Clearinghouse. And so we can run a list of names and find out exactly where those students went. So we can start to get an idea of our competitors and where they're going. It's not really a surprise where we lose most students to. Anybody want to guess what the top 3 are? I heard U of M maybe. I heard Michigan State, Grand Valley. Those are the 3. And so the first place is Michigan State. And great university, but they've really grown. And one of the challenges we have is when Michigan State opens their doors even further, they really dip into our pool. University of Michigan is a new one for us, and that's a good. It's great to be associated with University of Michigan. It's also horrible to be associated with University of Michigan. And they really entered our list when they became test optional. They started to admit a lot of students that were absolutely deserving to get into U of M, but in previous years wouldn't have because of SAT scores. And we can go into the validity of SAT scores. There's some students who just don't do well on them, and they're the best students. So when they became test optional, that sort of hurt us, but it was the right thing to do. It was a good thing for them to do. And then Grand Valley, I don't know. It's just Grand Valley does a lot of things up there, and so they're the primary competitor too. So
based on that question, do you want to talk a little bit what we're hearing about Michigan State in particular?
yeah, so it sounds like they're opening their doors a little bit again. And when I say open their doors, what they'll do is they'll go through and they'll admit students initially, but they also do a wait list, and then based on the data that they're looking, they have a certain number that they want to get to. And I'll be blunt, a lot of this is impacted by some of the issues that Michigan State has had with their lawsuits and things like that, where they've had to enroll larger classes. In fact, they enrolled a class so large a few years ago that they had to ask all faculty and staff, this is not a joke, if they would be willing to volunteer in the dining halls because they just couldn't meet the needs of their students. But when they do that, we start to adjust our forecasts because they're likely to take some students from us. Now what we hope is, and we're kind of looking into this now, is how many of those students do we actually get back, because the experience here, being biased is much more positive and supportive than the Michigan State environment. Great university, I'm not saying that, but we I think have a little bit more of a focus on student success and really helping students be successful than they do as the large institution that they are. So if there's any Michigan State graduates, don't send me email or anything like that.
Is aggressive enough?
Enough. That's so. I think it is in the sense that it's hard to say whether it's enough, but because you also have to be strategic about it because it costs money. Every student you try to recruit costs money, and we spend a lot of time and I'm going to say a decent amount of funds too, working with outside entities that use a lot of prediction models because to know where's our bread and butter of students, and we try to really focus on that because there's not unlimited resources. So if we had an extra $1 million, could we do more? I mean, always. There's not an area on campus who couldn't answer the same thing. But we really try to be strategic on targeting those areas. And I'll give you an example. So there was a project, I think it was a couple years ago, where enrollment management worked with university advancements and looked at where do we have clusters of a lot of alumni from Western, but also clusters that overlap with there's a decent number of high school graduates who go out of state. And so we identified some markets that we could target. One of those markets was Seattle. Another one is Denver, believe it or not. And so kind of using data to really target where we go because we just can't go everywhere. And so I think we're pretty aggressive, and we're certainly way more aggressive than we were 5 or 6 years ago. But if any of you have any kids, the amount of materials you get now is just crazy. So, yes.
So Chris, so incoming freshmen, you get an application, and then that student ends up ultimately going someplace else. Or a student who's been here and then leaves. Is there any mechanism in place that reaches out to those students that helps identify what caused them to make the decision to either change their mind and not come at all, or to decide to move someplace else?
Yeah, we do. And so when a student says to us, we have surveys that go out quite often, say, no, I'm picking another university, then they get a survey that looks at that. And some of the some of the reasons, it doesn't give you a ton of information, but some of the primary reasons has been, one was campus environment. And campus environment really, and these reasons are not always, I would say, accurate, but it's perception. So sometimes there's the impression that Western, that all the students leave on the weekends, and there's not a lot of student life activities. We know that's, when we started to see that, we know that wasn't true, but we thought, well, that's the impression that students sometimes are leaving with. So Student Affairs has been wonderful at really incorporating more of the registered student organizations and that campus life aspect into what we call our Future Bronco Days, into open houses, so a prospective student and family can really see all of the opportunities that exist to, as we say, you find your group, because high school students, they're interesting. I mean, they're very few of them know exactly what they want to do and pick on that, but a lot of it is feel. And it's like, how do you interpret feel? And I'll give you an example. My daughter, who doesn't go here, but she visited a university in Chicago that's an amazing university, and she walked away like, I can't stand this place. I'm like, you were there for like a couple hours. What are you talking about? And she's like, it was the feel. It was the feel that she experienced. Now, that's an N of 1, but that school was out right then. And so, getting in the mind of an 18-year-old, and not all our students are 18-year-olds, but that is the bulk of our new students, so that's what we talk about.
Okay, don't see any more questions, so can we take?
Thank you, I appreciate it.
I have no idea how to work that thing.
No, I think it's good.
Okay.
I think we should be able to plug in here. Good morning, everyone. Let's see if technology is going to work. All right. Happy Tuesday. I just want to say, I was thinking about it in the shower way too early this morning. You know, there's our faculty, they enrich the minds. We got our students, they're kind of our caffeine and sugar. They bring the energy. But all of you, you're really the heartbeat of our campus, and I really do appreciate it from the bottom of my heart. So thank you. I appreciate it. We got our power plant, you keep the lights on. We've got HR and payroll to make sure we get paid. Beautiful campus, thanks to all of our landscaping folks and janitorial staff. So all of you, I really appreciate you. All right. Oh, and let's not forget our cops back there that keep us safe too. Now to the fun stuff. So where are we? State budget. It's June. This is the time. This is the time that they usually get things done sometimes, some years. This year I think they will get it done. So how are they doing with higher education? We're gonna kind of look at the current picture, then we're gonna go back. We'll look back a little bit, and then we'll see where it ends. So right now, as it stands, the governor and the Senate both proposed 2.5% increase to base funding for all universities. So typically across the board, they just say all universities, you're gonna get the same amount across the board for your operations. That's the way it's been for 20 years or so, and I don't see that changing. So the governor proposed 2.5%. Senate stayed in line with 2.5%. Also keep in mind the governor proposed free community college. So it's a little bit of a game. We'll talk a little bit more about that if you want. But essentially what it is they're increasing the financial aid to community college students so it can become free. The House proposal was 3.3%. Across the board. So what do those numbers mean to Western? Think about that. 2.5% from the state, from the Senate and the governor. That's about $3 million in new revenue to Western Michigan University. 3.3%, that's about $4 million in new revenue. What's our operating budget at the university? Anyone got some ideas? Jan, you can't keep your mouth shut. Colleen, keep your mouth shut. Anyone? You're pretty warm. 400 million. That's it, give or take a few pennies. So think about that. 3 million from one budget, 4 million from, or 3 million from two budgets, 4 million from another budget in new revenue to run our state university on a $400 million budget. So they're giving us 1% in new revenue to run the university. So that's why what Chris was telling us is so important, because we're not getting the investment. I don't know, have your costs gone up by more than 1% this year? I think most of us have. So that's what we're dealing with. That said, we do go after some other pots of money that help us, but it's not the operating dollars that you want to do. The Senate wanted to tie. They give us another 2.5% in one-time money if we did all these special things that are called best practices, but a lot of them are just not attainable. So every community college student that transfers with an associate degree automatically becomes a junior. Well, accreditation really can't do that. It's going to depend on the program and what classes they've taken. There's a lot of those kind of things that they thought were cute that would kind of move us towards best practices. Love to work with them on some of those things, but again, it was tied to 2.5% in one-time money, not base operational dollars. We did get another MEPSERS payment included in the Senate, which would pay off what's left of this year's MEPSERS payment for the university. So that would equate to about $1 million in cost avoidance for Western. And Senator McCann from Kalamazoo. How many of you know Senator McCann? Okay, a few of you. He's the chair of the higher education subcommittee in the Senate, so he can be really helpful to us, and he has been. So he included $750,000 for a WMU research project called Project Clean Michigan. The House also focused more dollars on the Michigan Achievement Scholarship, which started last year, and it adds more financial aid to incoming freshmen. So about $5,000. There's all these different pieces to it, but it's about $5,000 that can help. We had I think about 1,000 students, Chris, that sound right? That qualified for Michigan Achievement last year, freshmen?
The freshman.
Yeah. So less than half of our freshmen, but a good number of our freshmen qualified for the Michigan Achievement Scholarship, and it gave them $5,000. That's a good thing. Both the House and the Senate proposals include a tuition cap. Final budget, let's hope, is going to be done in June. Why is this important to us? 2018 to 2024, state funding increased to Western. Our base funding has increased by $10 million. $10 million. So an average increase of 1.5%, far below the inflation we're all feeling these days. So that's what we've been seeing for a long time. The state has really been disinvesting in higher education. Maybe they're giving us a little bit extra, then they cut us a year. And I'm going to show you a slide here in a minute that shows you the roller coaster. But they have been investing in the Michigan Achievement Scholarship. So let's, give them credit for at least investing in the students. But essentially what they're doing is they're saying, we'll give you the dollars, you decide where you're going to go, instead of investing in the operations that it takes to run the universities that already exist around the state. Without the increases in state funding, we all know it, we feel it every day. With only those two sources, it's got to come from somewhere. And so if the state isn't investing in us, enrollment is a challenge. That means tight budgets at the university. So, my roller coaster slide, this is the new ride at Cedar Point. It's called State Line Roller Coaster. I know, it's a little early for humor. So let's go back. That far line over here, where the arrow is, 94, 95, might be hard for you to read. That's where we were in state appropriations literally 30 years ago. And then you saw the 90s were pretty good for higher education. Somewhere around the top of that roller coaster was term limits. I don't know that it has anything to do with it. I'll let you decide. But also, so that top line was just over $125 million that they were giving to Western Michigan University 2001. What happened around that time? 9/11, you got it. And the tech bubble burst. And the manufacturing economy started to kind of collapse. So Michigan kind of went into a decade of malaise, difficult times, even before the Great Recession. So then you see that line where you have the other big death drop in the roller coaster. But you'll notice that says 2011, 2012. Well, the Great Recession was what? 2008, 2009. So it took a couple years because the federal government, again, propped up the states after that period. And so we didn't really feel the effects of the Great Recession until fiscal year 2011, 2012. And then you'll see, started to climb back up, COVID. And then they were like, actually, people are spending a lot of money at home, so it wasn't as bad. So then they restored the cut the following year. And now we've been starting to creep up. But I always worry about the next death drop around the corner. So we've had a good run, but notice we are still below, in real dollars, the high that we received in 2000, 2001. So you can go back over 20 years, and in real dollars, that's not inflation adjusted. Now some of you say, well, we had more students back then. Okay, well, let's look at it. This is if you're looking at how much the state gives us per student. So back in 2000, 2001, it was just over $5,000 a student. So today, or if they gave it to us, that black line would be if they just gave us inflationary increases from that time to now, we would be at just under 80 or 9,000? Yeah, just under 9,000 a student. And that yellow is where we are. So they're, again, not keeping up with inflation, and that's our current student count. So again, even though we've lost students, they're not giving us the same amount of money that they could be or should be. So we could use all of your help in contacting Senator McCann and others to help us there. So what does it mean on a student basis? Think about that. If we had the same budget and the state had given us that amount of money, our students would pay $2,128 less in tuition. So we've heard over and over about how much student debt students have these days. It's because the states aren't investing in higher education. It's not just a Michigan problem, it's a national problem. So again, I think Chris kind of mentioned 75% from tuition, 25% from the state. And you can see that line just keeps declining. I wanted to go back even farther, but we couldn't get the line to go back. But literally, if you went back to about 1994 when that chart started, you were over 50% from the state and less than 50% from the students. In fact, I think back in the 80s, it was like 2/3 from the state, 1/3 from tuition. And now that is completely flip-flopped over a generation where now most of the cost is on the backs of our students, not on the state. And it's just because they're not investing in higher education. They're investing a lot in K through 12. Why are they investing more in K through 12 than higher education? Anyone got any ideas? I heard a couple ideas. Shout them out. Okay, great answer. Okay?
Because they're not educated enough to get into college by the time they get out.
No, but I mean, the truth is, powerful political lobbying interests, both from parents, grassroots, and the union, that all combine into a political powerhouse. We just don't have that. You know, try to get our students to all activate and go up to Lansing. It's pretty darn hard. Try to get our faculty to do all those things. Kind of hard to do too. So the more that we can activate as a grassroots to say, hey, you got to invest in higher education the same way you're doing record investments in K through 12, they're not doing that with us. But let's look at some good news. Under President Montgomery's leadership, we've had a lot of success on special projects. So, MEPSers, how many of you have heard of MEPSers? You two can't talk. The Michigan Public School Employee Retirement System. Western and 6 other universities, the only 6 that existed in the 1940s except for Michigan, Michigan State, and Wayne State. We were the only 6 that were in the MEPSer system. Grand Valley wasn't created yet. Saginaw Valley wasn't created yet. What other ones? Were those? Oh, Dearborn, Flint. Those were all created in the '64 Constitution. So the other 6 were, the state said, we're going to put you into the MEPSer's retirement system in the 1940s, and don't worry, we'll pay all the costs forever. And then in the 1990s, they said, oh, wow, this is getting really expensive. So you're going to have to pay some of your costs. So since 1996, the state gives us that check that I was showing you, and then they send us an invoice for MEPSers. Give us back 10%, essentially, of what you gave us. So how much do you think we've given back to the state for something they said they would always pay the cost for in the last 25 years? $250 million we've given back to the state for MEPSer's costs. So a few years ago, we said, let's fix this. So a coalition of us got together. There was $650 million of liability that wasn't paid off. We said, let's see if we can get the state to pay off their liability for the universities and help relieve some of that burden for us. Well, over 3 years, we got them to pay down $587 million of the $650 million. So we have now deferred about $120 million of future costs that we know we would have been billed from the state that we no longer are going to be billed. So it's over a long period of time. It's not like they came and handed us a big check with a smile and the cameras, but every year that's costs that we don't have to pay into the future, which is really, really helpful. Let's see, what else do we got here? We had state funding projects, $15 million for aviation, $30 million for Dunbar Hall. This year they invested in deferred maintenance. Yay, they hadn't done that since the 1990s either. So they gave us $8 million. It was on a formula that other universities were also able to get, but we got $8 million to help us with all the costs that we know needed around this campus. $20 million for other projects. You can see the list there. I won't read them all. But we've had really good success with a lot of our legislators, both state and federal, that have helped us on special projects over the last 7 years. So grassroots is important. I kind of talked about it. Click on that little QR code. You'll get signed up for our newsletter. We'll help tell you, hey, here's who's helping us. Hey, here's who we need you to contact to make sure that we are getting the help that we need. Always love your help. They want to hear from you as much as they want to hear from us. They get tired of hearing from me. They'd love to hear from you. We'll help you figure out how you can make your voice heard. We'll make it easy for you. So with that, I'm going to open it up to questions. It can be about anything. Doesn't have to be about state government.
Thank you. This question might be better for the budget aspect of it. What we see in these numbers, and I think we all appreciate the impact we have. Like that last slide showed $200 million approximately of savings due to legislative changes and stuff like that. We all know a couple years ago the university was given $500 million. How come we never see that money in the chart? How come we don't see where that offsets the budget? We got given over 1 year's budget.
Right.
But we never see that on the chart.
Well, I'll give a little commentary on it, and then I'll turn it over to Colleen. First of all, that's in the foundation versus the university's operating budget. That gift is also given over 10 years, so it wasn't that one big check was given to the university. And it's an endowment, essentially, so it's designated for purposes of student recruitment, scholarships, and other things to help with student activities. It wasn't given for operational expenses for the university. I'll let you add anything more.
I'm going to speak specifically to the MEPSers piece that Jeff talked about. And I think last year we put it on the chart, and you're going to see it when we talk about the fiscal year 25 assumptions. So last year we actually had relief from our general fund of over $8 million, so we do build it in. So as Jeff said, the big payment is on future liabilities. We were paying close to $13 million,
Yep.
right, annually for MEPSers, and our bill was reduced to about $5 million. And the last payment we're going to see, you'll see for budget assumptions, we have a little bit of relief. So again, it's the long-term effect of that, so it's saving us annually. So you will see a credit.
And I think one way that it's kind of hidden but felt around campus was the fringe benefit rate, 52% or whatever it was. Warren, is that about right? Was reduced because the MEPSers cost was reduced. So that literally was a personnel cost that was built into the system. And so the fringe rate on every employee, I think, was reduced last year to 47%. So a pretty significant reduction on the benefit cost because we were able to get rid of that MEPSers liability. That answer your question?
Well, yes and no. I mean, even if people earmark it, even if it's over time, if they earmark $10 million for the geology department, that's $10 million that you no longer have to put into the geology department out of the general fund. So where does that $10 million go? Does it get moved from geology to payroll or to wages or to benefits?
Yep. Well,
That's the kind of stuff that I'm curious.
the expert is going to give you the best answer for that.
So just like there's this wonderful inflow, there's also more outflows for the university as you look at increased costs for raises, personnel costs, and as Chris talked about enrollment, our projections a 1.4% decline for fall, and that's actually an improvement from past years. So as enrollment has declined, the dollars from tuition revenue have gone down by millions, and the tuition increase does not offset what we're losing based on less enrollment. So, and I know this is a painful point for my colleagues, I've heard it. Most of his good work, especially with MEPSers, rather than coming in and being able to really add to the benefit of the university, was used to offset these other growing costs. And if we hadn't had it, we would have had budget reductions. And some of us who have been here a lot longer know we almost were having budget reductions every year, it seemed like, for over a decade. And we have not had budget reductions since the COVID year. And that's because of the good work of Jeff and his team on the MEPSers. So does that help, Dennis?
And well, and I think one last point too, and then I'll let Chris add to that. I mean, usually when you do get a donation from a donor to geology, it's going to be earmarked either for equipment or a scholarship or a visiting professor or something along those lines. But it's going to be an add to, not to the operating expenses of the geology department. Chris?
That's exactly what I was going to
Yeah.
say. It's not to replace what you're doing. If I donate $1 million to the university, I'm probably donating to do something new, not just replace cost. That's just what Jeff said.
Yep. Other questions? Yeah.
So the state offsets money to the community colleges. Basically, you're saying they want to just basically fund them free or whatever. Why can't a university get that same kind of money for the first 2 years of college for their undergraduate?
That's actually what was proposed. Governor Whitmer did a council called Growing Michigan Together. Why are we losing so many people from Michigan? What do we got to do? Dr. Montgomery even served on one of the panels for it. What the panel said for higher education is, we're the ones that are bringing new people into the state. Where's a lot of our students coming from right here at Western? Chicago, out of state. We're one of the 2 universities that are actually net importers of new people to the state of Michigan. So a lot of people come from outside of the state to go to the University of Michigan. Guess what? When they're done, they leave and they go to the coast to get their jobs. They're not staying in Michigan. People that come to Western Michigan University are typically staying. Kalamazoo's kind of a nice place, and if we can offer them a workforce, they're staying. And so we've been making that case, that if you invest in the universities, you should be able to get Michigan to grow instead of shrink, which we've been doing for a number of decades. So we made that case and said, if you're going to do something where you want to do it, make every first 2 years free. Universities or community colleges. We're still working on it. It's a work in progress. So this year they may increase that Michigan Achievement Scholarship so that technically community college is free. It's not like there won't be any tuition charged at a community college anymore. It's that they're going to essentially say, we'll make sure your bill is paid through state resources. We'd like to see them up that same amount for the university. So we're still working on it. Yeah.
So a lot of high schools and stuff work with their community colleges and stuff. Is Western working with high schools in that same way?
Absolutely. We have great programs. The AMP Lab up in Grand Rapids is a great example of an advanced manufacturing partnership that we're doing with Grand Rapids Community College, Grand Rapids Public Schools, private employers. And so starting at that early age, we're creating that pipeline where you can get in there, learn skills while you're in high school, then while you're at the community college, work at this private sector job, getting the skills, you get certified in certain things, then you can get your associate's degree and then continue on and get your 4-year degree in advanced engineering. So we're doing everything that we can and pulling out all the stops.
Thank you.
Okay, any last questions at all?
Thanks for your time, everyone. I gotta get you the microphone here too, huh? Here, I'm gonna let you do it. I don't wanna.
People are leaving. I don't know what to say about that. All right, in the interest of time, I think we're losing our crowd. I'm going to skip the front section. It's going to give a lot of background information, which both Chris and Jeff touched on, and we spent a lot of our time together last year talking about what makes up our budget, where do we get our money. So I'm going to get right to what I think everybody's wondering about is what are we looking for in fiscal year 25. I don't know how to adjust that. And first of all, I do want to thank Chris and Jeff. They're wonderful partners, and this time of year we're constantly checking in and seeing where we are. So as Jeff mentioned, we'll start with state appropriation, which is close to 25-26% of the revenue that comes in. We know we have this range of 2.5% to 3.3%. So we have a range. We're going to model ranges right now. I know that seems, I'm going to say, are we being transparent? Is this reality? This is our reality. We really don't know where we are. We hate to say that, but we have our board meeting June 27th. We hope we have a state budget. What we do have to have is a tuition rate. So there are certain things we have to do regardless of knowing all the pieces. So we will take a proposed budget to our board. So again, we're going to talk about ranges, and over the next 2 weeks, Jan and I are going to be very busy tweaking and seeing where we are. So for state appropriation, what we didn't talk about was, along with a state appropriation, the state ties us to our tuition rate increase. And so we have 4.5% for both, I believe it is the governor and the Senate, and then the House went to 5%. We're kind of one of the last schools to actually take our tuition and budget, so we actually are monitoring. We've talked to the board in April, got a feel about where we think we have ability to go. We will not be the highest, and we probably won't be the lowest. So, only 3 or 4 schools, I believe, have actually passed tuition. The next, I'm going to say from June 15th till the end of the month is where there's just numerous board meetings for all the schools, and the tuition rate will get set. So then we have the tuition restraint is really based on, it's not just your tuition, but it's all mandatory fees. And for us, that means the student assessment fee that WSA can vote in is part of that calculation. They have requested that they get a fee increase. There's many years they haven't. So we have to actually take that piece into our calculation. So as we're talking about our ranges, we have to take out a little bit of tuition because it's going to go directly to the student groups, and that's what they fund, their student, registered student organizations and their government. Enrollment projections. So as we've talked about, tuition is our largest revenue component. There's actually 2 factors, so the tuition rate and then the enrollment, and we do have the enrollment decline. One of the strange things this year is we have, typically if you have a 1% change and your mix stays the same, because we have varying tuition categories, our non-residents pay more than our resident students. We're seeing a decline in our domestic non-residents and some in the grad international level. That's the higher tuition rate for us. So an impact of 1.5% or 1.4% decline actually equates to a larger decline for us on a tuition basis, because we're now moving some people down to the lower rate out of that mix. So we haven't seen that much lately. It's just this year we know that we didn't bring as many. It's looking like Indiana and Illinois is where that decline is. And then our compensation increases. So we know many of the increases now, which is good, but we have a huge unknown. We will be starting negotiations with our faculty next week. So they're the largest bargaining unit. So that's going to be an unknown, and we won't know that. I'd be shocked if we knew that in June when we go to board. And we will put this slide on our OBF page, so if you want to go back and reference it, you're more than welcome to. So what do our ranges look like? So if we look at our state appropriation, the 2.5 to 3.3, Jeff was right on, 3 million to 4 million increase. When we look at the tuition rate change, so this is the tuition component of that overall tuition dollars we expect to come in. We are modeling anywhere from, we're looking at a 3% range on the low end up to, honestly, I don't know that we'd go over 4, but we have modeled up to the 5 if we could possibly go there. But remember, there's a piece that has to come out then for the fee. So in total, we could gain from probably 8 million up to 12 million. Again, ranges, and we're gonna wait and see where we end up. I should say Grand Valley went early. They usually pass their tuition in July. They actually went early at 3.75, which is kind of a trigger for us. So I just want to keep that in mind. Please listen to the news. You'll see what our peers are doing. And then we get to the enrollment change. And this is where, when Chris talked about the 1.4, that's really equating to about a 3% decline once I'm going to give IR, the institutional research, kudos, and I would encourage any of you to go out and look at their website. There's so much enrollment data you can find about our mix and who's coming, but when they get to the forecast, they do a wonderful job. I don't do magic. They actually give me databases for every semester session we have and predictability. They tell me how many credit hours, how many students are taking, how many credit hours, and it really is based on past behavior. And again, it's that mix. The only thing that gets to be, that some people forget, is we have a block tuition rate for our undergrad. So when we might pick up some student credit hours, we don't necessarily see a change in our tuition if they're still within the block. So, but they set it up. I'm just really doing math. I apply the tuition, our new tuition rates to it. So that's how that 3% is truly just a calculation. It's not a guess. It's running the latest mix through. We actually meet tomorrow afternoon. So tomorrow we're gonna get what we hope to be the forecast for the budget. We waited, so we changed the confirmation date for students, incoming students, from May 1st to June 1st. So we held off doing a forecast until we had the June 1st date. Orientation sessions are going. Housing is a huge indicator. There are a lot of things you can do to trigger you may or may not come. Once you pick your room, we're pretty sure you're coming. So that just opened up for incoming freshmen. So we're gonna be monitoring, as Chris said, we have lots of people on our committee that talk about these things. We sought some clarity on the international students. Nobody seemed to understand at first why that was declining. So tomorrow we're gonna get a lot of information. As a group, we agree, we come to agreement on, from a budget perspective, what is our budget enrollment target? And I will say, Chris mentioned the Grow Your Own program, which is wonderful. We don't include it in our base budget, so it has helped us the last couple years, but it's a very short population, short program. So we don't want to build a budget where we actually give money out and people plan on it. This program is ending, I think it was 3 years. So we really are only gonna have one more cohort after this year. So again, from a budget perspective, we're really different than maybe some of the daily numbers you're seeing, but we as a group, we all agree what the base budget number will be, and then we just apply it to the budget. So as you can see, we have potential revenue, overall revenue increase of about 1.5 million up to 7 million when you offset the potential enrollment decline. And then our expense changes. As we've talked many times, compensation is by far our largest category. And again, we have the ranges of what we've been modeling. Let's see, utilities, we do expect a slight increase, so it's 5%. Overall, it's about almost $700,000 increase to us with fringes, no change. This is where we're going to start. The next item you see, a credit in our expenses. This is due to that large payoff. This is the last piece of the large payoff on the MAPSers. So we'll reduce the retirement rate on the fringe calculation again for this next year. And we expect on the general fund side to save another $4 million annually. So thank you, Jeff. They have done a wonderful job. We didn't ever think we'd see that come through. So we're really pleased with that. The other item is student financial aid. This is one that's still out there. We've got some varying thoughts. So one thing we do is, for at least for need-based aid, we do want to see an increase that would offset the tuition rate increase. So there's some ranges provided there. So if we had a 3% versus 4% tuition rate increase, we'd automatically have a change. The president has tasked, I'm going to say enrollment management, the provost office, with coming up with a holistic financial aid packaging strategy. We're not quite there yet. We did have change in our enrollment management area. So I think any huge change, we're going to see another year out. But this is key. So we've gone up to 2 million. But what's key about financial aid is we've already awarded, right, for fall of 25. We've got to get our plan together pretty quickly. They're going to start talking to students about fall of 26. So as students start coming, I don't know, do they start in August, Chris? Or are they coming now for tours in high school? They start asking these questions. So we really need to get our merit-based awards published and on. So from this, then you can see we have projected increases of a little bit over $1 million, or 5.6 million. I need new glasses, is all I'm going to say, and up to almost 9 million. So again, we have these ranges. I want to remind everybody, we talked about this last year. We were in a position last year, we were able to set up a budget stability fund. So we had a slight increase last year, about $2.6 million. We did not give that out. We do have a balanced budget. We've held it in reserve. The president has some thoughts on how to use it one time for this current year. But what is going to help us balance our budget this year, depending on the enrollment number, is using out that stability fund. Hopefully we're not in the position of declines or budget reduction. I'm not anticipating that, but we're going to eat into that fund. And so again, we're going to just be modeling. We meet with the president, I believe it's next week, to really get his thoughts on what do we want to do tuition rate. Although our group will set our enrollment target tomorrow, we will monitor. So up until June 27th, Chris and I will be best friends. We're good colleagues anyway, but we'll be just checking in to see any indicator. And again, it's really going to be, we do find if students come to orientation, we have a very good chance of yielding them, especially non-resident students. If they're taking the time to come, chances are we're going to see them in the fall. Unfortunately, not everybody does follow through and come here, so we watch the housing. We're going to be watching registrations for returning students. I think we're lagging a little bit in a couple categories. The Student Success Hub's going to be calling. They start calling students that if a returning student hasn't registered, they'll be reaching out. They'll be reaching out to incoming students, anything we can do to actually yield them and get them to come here in the fall. And again, we'll just keep monitoring that as we progress. So that's what we have today. Do you want to add any comments on?
Just go to Q&A.
Okay. Any questions, concerns? Hi, Brian.
I have a question, but it's more on a departmental level than the overall budget. But I know that there's been a belief, and maybe it's a reality, you can clarify this, that if a department gets $1 million a year budget to operate, and they've been fiscally responsible and they realize that sometime in May, maybe they've only spent $800,000, that there's a belief that they need to spend that extra $200,000 because if they don't, it's going to get taken away and the budget might only be $800,000 next year. So you go out and buy all new computers when the ones you bought 2 years ago are just fine because you have to find a way to do that. And if that is a reality, it just doesn't seem to promote being fiscally responsible.
So I'm going to say that's not necessarily reality, but I can't speak to every vice. So much of that is determined by each vice president area. I will say I've never seen anyone's budget get reduced because they didn't spend. And Chris is happy to chime in because academic affairs is the largest portion of the budget. But I will say centrally we do not pull money. If you did not spend it, at the very least it stays within your vice presidential area. So any reallocation would be done by a vice president. Chris, do you want to talk about academic affairs?
In academic affairs, we do not take that money. So if there would be $200,000 that was unspent, that will go into a carry forward account. Those dollars will carry forward to the next year, and the department can use those dollars for things the subsequent year.
And I have a second question. So much of what was presented today, and I appreciate everybody sharing all this information today, is speculation. And with the exception, I guess, of the talks with the AEP this summer, most of it is going to be a little bit more finalized in a few weeks. So why not wait until then, instead of doing a presentation today that's based on assumptions, instead of waiting a few weeks until it's a little bit more definite? And I'm not being critical, I'm just curious.
You want to?
So actually there's several reasons. One is, I think sometimes people think you know all along and you're just not sharing information. And so part of our purpose is for you all to understand the process, because this process is in place each and every year. That's one reason. The other reason, too, is sometimes I think the world believes that all this information is known, cabinet is omnipotent, and that we have answers to everything. We don't. So what we're really showing is, this is behind the curtain. This is what is going on so that you are informed. 3, we've been trying to respond to input received from you all as to what you were interested in, which was state, student enrollment, recruitment, retention. And I think last point, when the budget is set, and honestly, I have been on board date and rewritten budget 5 minutes before the board meeting. That's happened to me 2 or 3 times. So, board, you have a budget, it's put out there, it's done, and then most people just kind of look at it and go, well, it's done, there's no change, there's nothing we can affect with it anyway. So, to do a session after the end and say, well, we were thinking of this, but this is where we ended up, most people really aren't interested at that point. I'm happy to post, though, after the board, what we are doing for what you see up here, so that you have an easy source to go out and see where our thinking led us to in budget, so that it's readily available. Because there is nothing behind the curtain. I mean, I think this is really the point of the conversation. And we also wanted to give you all an opportunity to share your thinking. What are you hearing? What's bothering you? Did you have a son or daughter, and where are they going to college, and why did they pick that college? That's all information that's helpful to Chris and his team. Jeff is looking for help in Lansing as he works with people. And like the question you just posed, Brian, you know, there's a lot of perceptions out there on campus practices that aren't real, but we don't know what those are unless you tell us about it. So I'm happy to post after the date what it is, but also want you to know all the unknowns and what really is happening for the process so that you can go out and share the information with others on campus. We need you to be part of the communication across campus. So those were the reasons. But if you all, again, we meet at your benefit and to do what's helpful to you all. So if you all would prefer waiting till after the budget is set and after we know enrollment, just send a note and we'll just change what we're doing. It's easy to do.
I would just add, Brian, I have recently received queries. Are we looking at a budget reduction? I mean, again, this too is just to give a sense of, no, not at this point. We think we can get through this year and we'll focus on next year. But it's just people always say it's a black hole. We don't want it to be a black hole. This is the best information we have. Just, you know, and again, it will probably be the 26th as we're making tweaks and truly understanding what we're taking to the board.
I just wanted to know with all our high energy efficiency that we've been out on campus, is there savings that we're seeing? I mean, because utilities calculated, are we seeing them somewhere, or are we just utilizing money somewhere else?
So let me rephrase that question and make sure we understand it. So the assumption was 500,000 for the utilities, and what is the basis for why we're putting that in the budget? Is that truly the question?
The basis of us going into higher efficiency with our utilities, are we seeing a decrease in that overall cost? Have you actually seen something happen, or is this?
Yeah, actually,
Burn Arts Center going down, because Burn Arts Center used to calculate their bill, and Student Center going up. Do we have a higher cost than the Student Center, or is it the same?
yeah, that was a really good question, and I did see some of my power plant team here earlier. I'm not sure if they left, and I saw you're pointing. Where's George? George. So the reason why I'm kind of smiling is for quite a while there was a great deal of stability in our power plant operations and efficiency. So they do a really good job. We purchase gas out in the future. We were doing good with pricing there. Consumer Energy caught on to the game, changed how they build, and so they called a peak demand time, and we started getting hit with bills of $150,000 on one day for 15 minutes of use. So we then made significant investments in the power plant, because that was a dirty game of consumers' power. We didn't want to be at their mercy. And so we invested multiple millions to put in peaking generators. That's great. But then what you see happens, we were doing really good, but then we have 2 gas turbines and both broke. They just for different reasons, lots of complications, but they're running about 2, one ran 3 million, the other's 2 million. So what you see with those increases are not only our actual costs, but we have to build up a replacement reserve for the equipment because, for example, one of the turbines was 25 plus years. We're just at the end of the life on a lot of the equipment. We got the power plant in 1990. Some of the equipment that's still in there is what we got when we got the plant in 1990. So when you see that 500,000, it's not because of less efficiencies. We've become more efficient, have greater redundancy, usually have greater stability, although it's been a wild few months with the power plant and what's been happening there. But we need to replace and put in the infrastructure so that we have what we need for 25, 30 years out for campus. So. And I did tease the team about, I liked it when I came and there wasn't any excitement whatsoever, but we've not been there lately. Dennis?
Okay, this might be a complicated question, but it kind of ties back
There you go.
into my previous question, similar situation. As most of the maintenance know, we're operating roughly 30% less than we were, staff level, pre-COVID. So there's this 30% cost savings in wages, which is always put up in front of us as the the number one thing of the expense that we don't know. It's always being thrown in our face of wages. Well, we're bankrupt in the university. But, so there's a significant savings there. We just learned that there's about 5% savings in the fringe rate, which is significant. So between those two, why aren't we reinvesting that money into maintenance staffing levels so that we can service our students and get back to maintaining this campus at the level that it needs to be? Because we're not doing PMs, we're not doing stuff that's going to come back and bite us in 10, 15 years. So, we recently addressed certain positions, but we haven't addressed the positions that we're having trouble hiring. We've had electrician vacancies for over 3 years. We can't keep plumbers. We can't hire fitters so that we're spending double to have RW Lapine on campus at twice the rate. So why aren't we reinvesting that money back into our personnel that have pride in the university and maintaining it and servicing their students? Again, that goes back, where did that money go? That significant money savings out of the maintenance budget, where did that money go? And why aren't we using it to reinvest in our students? If that makes sense.
No, it did. And, some of us have been around a long time, me included, but we have a lot of new employees who don't know what happened 2 years ago or 3 years ago. So as Jeff already talked about the COVID years, we did a significant campus budget reduction. It was over $70 million reduction. And business and finance shared in that significantly. Mine was a little over $8 million, if I'm remembering correctly.
10, I think.
How much?
Closer to 10.
10 million, according to my better memory person on my left here. So for the maintenance positions that you're talking about, those aren't savings. We got cut $10 million. We had to make very difficult choices all the way across business and finance. So no savings. As you look at the budget here, and if you look at the years in between, there isn't new money flowing to campus. What we're using are basically the savings that Jeff and his team were able to come up with MEPSers to offset financial aid increases, wage increases, whatever those may be, and lost enrollment. So it's not like there's new revenue flowing out, which is Jeff's whole point. The state's not investing in us.
I mean, you have, just in this year up there, you see an $8 million reduction in tuition, but only a $3 to $4 million increase from the state. So even this year, you're looking at that $4 million loss of revenue to us from those two main sources, and I think that's true every year going back. And if it wasn't for that MEPSers money the last few years that has kind of plugged the hole in the dam, we'd be in a worse situation.
Yeah, so there's some things we can't control. Enrollment decline is enrollment decline, so whatever that red number is, it is. We can't control what the state's going to give us. So if you look at that, if we got the least amount of revenue and the highest amount of expense, we're going to have a budget reduction of multiple millions of dollars, which business and finance will have to share. And we are just like the rest of the university. Most of our costs is personnel costs. About 70% goes to compensation. What we have done, with a lot of help from other people on campus since the last 3 or 4 years, we try to tweak where we can the assumptions in revenue and manage the expenses that we can, so that there is no budget reduction, but that we come in with a balanced budget. So I wish, Dennis, I love your vision that there were more resources that we could dedicate out into areas, whether it's academic affairs, governmental relations. That's not the case. It's what I would call a stable platform, but it's not by any means a growing platform. I hope that helps.
What confuses me though, when we saw the chart earlier, state revenue or state funding, and the graph is the second highest we've ever gotten as far as the graph went back. We're not in the 90s.
But that was in real dollars. So think about how inflation has changed since 2001 to where it is today. You've seen, a 50% increase in costs if you factor in tuition. So we're not even back to where we were in 2001, but with all the inflationary costs since that time.
I would, Chris, I don't want to put you on the spot, so you might not be able to look this up. If we went back to enrollment in fall of 20 versus enrollment, our projected enrollment in fall of 24, we're talking thousands of students, not, so it really is not to harp on people on, the enrollment piece, but it's key. So yeah, every dollar that comes in is helpful. Many years, I'm gonna say 3, 4 at least, we were starting with negative revenue, not even covering expenses. Like we weren't bringing in enough between state appropriation and tuition rate increase. So you're already starting with a negative number and then adding additional expense for compensation and financial aid. So it really is the key driver. And this year it's nice to see we have a black number there. To be honest, whatever it is, it's a good thing.
About 3,000 fewer students from fall 20 to fall 2023.
Could you hear that? 3,000 students fewer over the last 3 years? 4 years.
And I think if you took inflation adjusted from that 2001 high, we'd be at 185, 190 million in state appropriations. So that shows the gap of probably about 60, 80 million dollars, somewhere in that range, that we should be getting from the state if they had just continued to fund us as inflationary increases from that.
That kind of Dennis's question though, about being able to hire outside contractors though with the rates that they're getting compared to hiring them in-house. I think that's our disconnect, is that we see outside getting the jobs that we used to have right in-house.
Yeah.
When we see 6, 8 people from Lapine on out there doing our pipe fitter stuff for the 4 people that we had before, making 2 to 3 times more than what our guys used to get. I think that's the disconnect that we see. And we're trying to understand, well, why is it easier for you guys? Sorry to say you guys.
That's okay.
Why is it easier for Western to hire outsource people instead of in-house?
So
Twice the budget.
yeah, I'm going to answer that, but I know we're over time, so if you have to leave, feel free to leave. I don't want to hold anybody back from other duties, and you won't offend us at all. And I appreciate that you were able to attend today, and I hope that you did find some of the information useful. Okay, so first, if we have a position, I would always want to try to hire and fill that position, and we do. And so I know, I see some head shakes there, but we go out with what we believe is market rates for compensation. I understand that when construction trades are running hot, their wages go up and run hot. And then when construction runs cold, they can lower what they pay people in fringes. We don't flex that way. When we have market rates, whatever the market rates are, we continue to pay and do our fringes. We attempted, and with the cooperation, working with you all, on updating market rates for all the ASME positions. We've gone through that step and we still have open positions. Here's where the difference is a little bit. Work has to get done because we have to keep campus open. Goes back to Jeff's comments at the beginning. I can work through facilities and use one-time money for project work, not base. I need base dollars for salaries, new lines, new positions. But if there's a project, it's one-time money. So the other point, and you haven't raised it, but I will, we haven't been able to increase the operating supplies since I have been vice president for landscaping, maintenance, garage, and we want to talk about inflation. It's out there. We're still on our operating budgets, except for those I had to reduce when we had budget reductions from when I came in as vice president 12 years ago. Now, if you don't think I find that frustrating as I'll get out, just like you're frustrated with what you're seeing, then you don't know me, because I'm frustrated. But what I do is I gather up all the pennies that I can from whatever sources, and thank the good work of Jeff and team for that $8.2 million from the state for deferred maintenance, and I put it back in for the project work. Now, your directors may see that more as we approve work, or they'll come in and I try to find money to help them with what they come in on. But that has been my reality as a vice president. I wish it were different. I hate to be a little bit of a gloom and doom, but just as you look at enrollment, you look at Michigan demographics going forward, you look at the state and where they're at, I really think it's going to persist for some time yet. I don't know how long, but that's pretty much how we've been operating for a decade plus.
Thanks, Jan.
Yeah.
I got a question.
Go ahead.
Would it do anything to do like an online course? You know, you see like Phoenix, Arizona and all that, but just a way to get more revenue in reaching across the globe.
I'm going to defer to Chris because we do a lot of online courses.
We do a lot of online.
Can you get your certificate, your bachelor's degree though?
Yeah, we have full degree programs on.
Well, that's good to know. I didn't realize we could do that, so I'm just thinking.
Yeah.
Hey,
Yeah, I appreciate that, Louis. Okay, so I see people getting ready to leave. We're going to stay for a while in case you have any questions, but again, thank you.